How's it going, dear viewers? This is your gracious host, Kaine Walker, once again. And before I get into the video, I want to point out that 72% of you are returning viewers that are not subscribed. Please do this channel the honor of serving you and your interests by liking, sharing, and subscribing so I can continue to make this content and reach a wider audience of storytellers. And for today, we will be reviewing the art of weaving exposition into your story. For a lot of singular topics within writing craft, I'm going to be doing this format because they don't really require a long form video to explain, and it gives me a chance to showcase a bit of my knowledge without being at the mercy of a script. I get to go on a bit of stream of consciousness, at least a little. Also, having an article in front of us will help guide my thoughts a bit better, and it'll also give you guys some sources because I like providing those for you just to show you that this knowledge doesn't come from nowhere. For setup, this question was brought to me by one of our writing club members who was having trouble figuring out just how much information they should include about a particular subject. For them at the time, it was their magic system, and they had 2 straight pages of exposition, and I advised them that it'd be much better to just show the system first and then create plot relevant reasons to include explanations about the magic system. That way it will have something to do with the plot in the moment, and it won't feel like the story's been ground to a halt just to dump some info. And with that, I will bring you to an article that I think will better lay out my teachings. I'll see you there. You've already heard the thoughts I just gave in the opening about exposition, but I think the more poignant parts of the lessons I'm trying to give would be how to write exposition, or what are some better ways to deliver your exposition. And I believe it starts with having interesting plot devices and interesting character aspects. Now, I know that's a lot easier said than done. It's very abstract, and that's the problem with creation a lot of times. It involves a great deal of intuition, whatever that means, right? There's a lot of things that can't really be taught when it comes to sensing what would make a good piece of exposition versus a bad piece of exposition. But I'm sure we can all agree, stopping the story in the middle of something interesting to just go on and on about some background details that we don't necessarily need in the moment would break your immersion, whether it's a movie, TV show, book, whatever it may be. You would agree that that's not the preferred way to receive your exposition. Right, so the way I try to deliver my exposition, outside of picking interesting plot devices and character details, I always try to have a scene in mind in which I plan on delivering some form of exposition, and it's always in service to the story and not necessarily in service to my interest as the writer. And yes, I understand that as writers we kind of get carried away with building our world and wanting to divulge details of it, but the fact is the reader doesn't really give a shit about a lot of the things you might, and it's not fair to subject them to that. When I say it's not fair, I don't mean you're doing it in a malicious way, but once you've been made aware that the reader has details that they might not want, it's only fair that if you expect them to pay for your work, right, that you serve them in some way. So here we have the article from Masterclass, Writing 101, How to Use Literary Exposition, written by Masterclass. In the world of writing, exposition refers to the art of providing essential background information about the main characters and the world of your story. Literary exposition can help provide emotional stakes throughout the beginning of the story, the rising action, the falling action, and the eventual denouement. What is exposition in literature? Before I read this, we kind of already know what exposition is. It is the key background information that the readers need to gain insights about your world, your characters, their goals, etc. Right? And that's just a brief description from the top of my head. Exposition is a literary device that is meant to relay background information about a main character, setting, event, or other element of the narrative. Exposition comes from the Latin word exposit. God, bear with me. Expositionem. I have no idea how to say that. I'm sorry. Which literally means showing forth. Backstory in literature can be conveyed through dialogue, characters, thoughts, or point of view, narration, flashbacks, description of the setting, or various pieces of in-universe media, such as newspaper headlines, journals, or letters. By the way, this detail they've just added is wonderful because a very good way of showcasing exposition in your story can be with variable bits of subtext. It doesn't even necessarily have to be character dialogue or things like that. Someone can read the title of a newspaper, title of a book or whatever, hear a conversation being had in the background, and glean bits of information about the story in that way. What is the purpose of exposition? Well, this question is answered by the first one. To be completely honest, it's to show details of the world, to get the reader involved in the story in some way. Exposition is designed to convey information that provides insight into a character or advances the story. The background information provided by exposition helps connect the reader to the emotional stakes of the narrative. As far as literary terms go, exposition may be one of the simplest to understand, yet nailing the exposition of a story is often one of the trickiest tightropes to walk for a writer. Provide too little of a character's backstory or background details and the reader will be confused. Provide too much expository information and the reader will be bored. You've likely heard the motto show, don't tell. That's why it's important to provide enough exposition to give your readers necessary context without tiring them with tedious details. Yeah, and this is very true. This could cause confusion, but more than likely, if you provide too little character backstory, the audience won't have a way to relate to them. They won't be attached to them at all. As far as writing too much information, yeah, they could get bored, but they could also feel like you're spoon feeding them and you don't trust them to fill in the blanks of the story themselves. How to write exposition through dialogue. This is very key. A couple things that'll help you write exposition through dialogue is, like I said before, having a scene or something that the character might be doing that's connected to the plot. Let's say you're writing a detective story and a character needs access to police files, right? They go to the police station because private investigators can request police files on cold cases. I'm not sure if they can request files on ongoing investigations. I'm pretty sure that's exclusive to actual consultants that are attached to a certain department, but I'm not sure. Either way, while they're in the police station and reading through these files, I'm sure the gears are turning in some of your heads already about how you can artfully convey exposition, especially if they're researching murder cases, missing persons cases, things like that. Dialogue is one of several types of exposition for effectively introducing critical background information in a way that feels unforced and natural. Rather than directly explaining important details through the information dump of expository writing, dialogue allows you to weave backstory or context into a conversation or argument. On the other hand, writers should avoid the temptation to cram a bunch of exposition into the dialogue all at once, as this can lead to an exchange that feels unnatural and boring to the reader. Yeah, this is completely correct, and I actually didn't think of this. Even if you use dialogue as a sort of vehicle to deliver your exposition, you still have to make it organic, and it can't feel like dialogue that's there for the sake of just giving information. The dialogue still has to have relevance to some occurrence within the story. The example I said earlier about the detective researching the cold case murder files in the police station. Hell, I could just make a Sherlock Holmes example. Like, what if Sherlock is in his police station with Watson and going over the details of the case in dialogue, right? They're just cracking open some cold cases to see if they can actually find some conclusions to them, and back and forth they're giving details that are actually pertinent to what's going on in the story. That'd be a good way to weave exposition through dialogue. But either way, at some point they have to stop talking and then take action with the information they have to continue the story and move the plot forward. So yeah, another great point by Masterclass. How to write exposition through narration. Most of that is going to be through character thoughts, especially if you're writing in first person. If you're an omniscient narrator, it's pretty much the same except you know everything, but it can be very hard if you're writing in third person omniscient, not just spill all of the beans. And being someone who doesn't really write in third person omniscient very often, can't really say how you would balance that. What I can do is provide you that information if you guys want to know more about that. But yeah, those are my thoughts before actually reading. Narration is one of the simplest and most direct ways to convey exposition. After all, the definition of exposition is the relaying of background information. Now, narrator is the one in charge of deciding what information to tell us. The way the narrator dispenses that information likely depends on the type of narration used in the book or short story. Omniscient narrators, for instance, have the ability to see into each character's thoughts and desires, and therefore can provide information about any character at any given time. A first-person narrator, on the other hand, can only convey the emotional state or background of the protagonist. It doesn't really give any pointers. As an omniscient narrator, the problem there is going to be that you don't really have an excuse for not telling the audience certain bits of information. You really don't. You can provide any information about any character at any given time. Anyway, more on that later. How to write exposition through internal monologue. That would be through the first person perspective. I'd be careful with this yet again. I would try to wrap this into something that's pertinent to a certain scene in the book. Reading is a great example. I keep going back to the reading the cold case files example. Before Sherlock decides to speak to Watson, perhaps he's going through in his head what he's reading in each file. That is a monologue, and you should be able to determine how long you want the monologue to go before the monotony is broken by dialogue. Because basically the point of this, the point of me breaking down this exposition lesson is showing you that you have to be versatile in the way you deliver it. So it's really going to be a combination of several techniques, many of them used at once, going from inner monologue to dialogue to subtext to scene breaks. Another way to provide good exposition or narrative is through a character's internal monologue. An internal monologue gives readers candid insight into a character's innermost thoughts and desires. For that reason, internal monologue is a particularly helpful method of revealing character. This internal monologue gives us insight into the main character's thoughts and feelings about the people around them. This is something I wasn't thinking about at the time. Exposition could also relate to character development and the like. The techniques used for character development and world building when it comes to exposition are pretty much the same. For any of you that would like to get some practice in on how to improve your exposition, if you want people to be the judge of your work when it comes to storytelling and things like that, there will be a link to our writing group in the description. You will be invited to our Discord server where we have weekly writing critiques, and we'll pretty much sharpen your skills that way. We have lectures, we have lessons like these. We're just a community trying to get better as writers. I think that is all the information I can provide for you in regard to exposition. This has been your gracious host, Kaine Walker. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.